Chronicles TV on air. We are now live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. In the previous episode, we did a summation exam. No, wait, we didn't do a summation examination. We did Madame Tuspel's testimony. Today's episode right now, we're gonna go into the robot, the scythe, and the Madame's testimony. If you have today's episode, make sure that like button supports the channel. In the cemetery 10 years earlier. The reason I was in Lowgate Cemetery at all 10 years ago was for a spot of moonlighting, shall we say. Yes, the illustration in the newspaper article was based on what I witnessed that night. But thinking back now, I realized that I never actually saw the professor. Soon afterwards, I was visited by a young woman who sculpted a model of me from a wax. Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of the newspaper article. Wait a minute, you're claiming you didn't actually see the professor now? Of course, you have to have a screw loose if you believe a corpse could come back from the dead. But, so you're saying the article is not worth the paper it's printed on? I think the word, though, that would describe it perfectly, yes. If the details in the article aren't true, it nullifies your argument for why Mr. Drever and Dr. Scythe would have been working together. I still couldn't even conclude it together. So he's discrediting himself to cripple my argument. Tell me, witness, you claim to have been in the cemetery on some auxiliary business. Can you elaborate? That's right, grave robbery, to be precise. That is still a crime. As you know, Lowgate Cemetery is at the rear of Barclay Prison. So among students at the university, it had a reputation for being haunted by the ghosts of the condemned convicts. Grave robbing, you say? Yes, exhuming fresh corpses to sell is reasonably lucrative. Of course, I never laid a finger on any valuables buried with the dead. So you were one of the so-called resurrectionists, a particular unpleasant scourge of society. Actually, my fellows and I went by another name. The what? Repurposers? Repurser? I don't know. That is quite beyond the pale. You would invite divine retribution, sir. Yes, well, I think I suffered retribution enough. The Daily Circus eventually unearthed my name and put it in print. It cost me a great many headaches. In the end, I had to leave the university. That was the only paper with the bad grace to identify me ambiguously, I might add. I see. Out of interest, who drew the illustration for the article? Ah yes, that was the reporter who exposed me. He sketched that right in front of me as I described the scene. Obviously, as time ticked on, I bitterly regretted what I'd done, claiming to have seen something I never truly saw. Foolish, very foolish. Well, counsel for defense, you may proceed to the cross-examination now. At once, my lord. Here we go. In the cemetery 10 years earlier. The reason why I was Lowgate Cemetery at all these years was for a spot of moonlight, shall we say. Hold it! By moonlighting, you mean grave robbing, do you? Surely you only need to look at the graveyard scene and my appearance to gauge the answer to that. The lantern and spade. But who on earth would want to buy a dead body? Any major hospital. A hospital? In order to better understand the human body, the study of anatomy is crucial to medical science. There isn't a hospital in the world that has enough specimens to work with. Though obviously they can't openly express an interest in obtaining more by dubious means, such as the one about 500 scalpels. As aspiring scientists, we young research students had no money to work with, as I'm sure you can imagine. So we made surreptitious arrangements with hospital via some of the medical student acquaintances. We would never take anything of value from the graves. This was all for the furtherance of science, you see. That's what we all call ourselves every time we stole into the graveyard at night, spade in hand. You realize body snatching is a serious crime. If you were caught, you could expect the gravest of consequences. We students were caught between the hammer and the anvil. We needed funds for research. Professor Harebrained said exactly the same thing. I'm quite speechless at the apparent levity with which you've revealed the abhorrent behavior. Well, if you wanted to know why I was there at Lowgate Cemetery, that's the reason. I never expected to end it that way it did. That I regret to this day. Yes, the illustration in the newspaper article was based on what I witnessed that night. Thinking back now, I realized that I never actually saw the professor at all, though. Soon afterwards, I visited by a young woman who showed him modeled me of wax. And I gave up my dream of becoming a scientist. Let me see if she's got to say something about that.
Hold it!
Let's see. That young woman being Madame Tustles, of course. Precisely. I must say I didn't expect to run into her again like this 10 years later.
As I have explained, I went by the name published in the article, and
Komeba? I found a man. Yes, the article in the Daily Circus, I think you said. I was a poor student with barely a penny to my name at the time. And the young lady put £5 in front of me. So you readily consented to having a waxwork of yourself made and gave permission for it to be put on display. I did. I should sell what little I had to sell, I concluded.
Ah, oui. I remember now. I purchased something else from you that day.
I can't speak French. Did you? I can't say I remember. What was it, madam?
His camera.
Ah. Oh yes, I made a point of taking it with me whenever I made an excursion into a cemetery. You took a camera with you, sir? To what end? To record the details of the bodies I disinherited. But I had no intention of ever visiting a graveyard again after that night, so I sold it. I see.
I still have it, monsieur. It is part of the special exhibit in my House of Horrors. I am very meticulous about such details. It is the Tuspo way. It would seem then that this is the very camera Mr. Drebber took with him to Lowgate Cemetery on the night of question.
Yes, interesting. Can't we show the dark stain already? And I gave up the dream of becoming a scientist, and it was because of the newspaper article.
Hold it!
This article, you mean, published in the Daily Circus. Yes, somebody informed the dean that it was my name that appeared in the article, and carelessly let it slip the night after night I was digging up graves. Hardly a model student, you might say. The university's reputation was extremely defiled. I was expelled as a result.
Mon Dieu, I had no idea.
And having been run out of university, you found employment in somewhat specialist trade. You combine your knowledge of science with knowledge of stage magic to create various experimental machines intended to demonstrate never-before-seen technology, and you use those deceptive machines to trick the government and private investors into giving you money. Professor Albert Harebrained was just your latest victim, wasn't he? Whatever are you talking about? I have no recollection of doing anything of the sort. What's Drebber up to? Why would he suddenly change his tune and recant his claim? I wonder if perhaps it's because his circumstance has changed now. What circumstance?
Well, if he admits to having seen the professor emerging alive from the grave 10 years ago, it would expose the secret in Dr. Sykes' past that she would desperately want to hide.
Yes, of course. If Drebber and Dr. Sykes are working together now, if Drebber were to betray her, there would be no reason for her to continue to cooperate. In that case, there's only one way around it. I'll have to prove he really did see it. Prove he really did see the professor's corpse coming from the back of that, as he originally claimed.
Yes, Mr. Naruto, exactly.
Okay, let's press on the other two.
Hold it!
And then we'll check on the evidence. The strange happening at Lowgate Cemetery, which you now deny? Not entirely. I ran to fetch the police at the time. You know, I was shaking like a leaf. But they didn't believe a word of it. In fact, I was fairly nearly arrested myself. So you went to the papers instead. I started big with the London News, but unsurprisingly, they didn't want to know either. In the end, though, it was the reports from Gossip Racks, the gutter press, that came to my story.
and spread it like the plague through the capital as gossip-hungry Londoners lapped up the tale.
The story was in every single paper at the time, with the exception of some broadsheets.
And yet only 2 or 3 of them actually have interviewed me personally. Most of the accounts turn out to be very interpretive ghost stories.
What about the article in the Daily Circus?
That particular journalist found me at my dormitory. I don't know how, but he discovered my name. So I recounted to him exactly what happened that night.
And from your description, he drew the illustration.
Precisely. That's how I learned that the condemned man was the infamous professor. Because the reporter told me so. I had no idea myself, you see.
Newspaper reporters are wont to stoop around in matters they don't concern them. So the scene portrayed in the illustration is accurate then.
Well...
Hold it!
What are you talking about?
I think I explained already, didn't I? Lowgate Cemetery is at the rear of the Barclay prison, so it was renowned among us students of the university.
We already go through that.
For some absurd reason, I was scared of the graveyard at night, and as a result, only too willing to believe that nonsense about the dead coming back to life.
But you said you actually saw it.
I said what I seen in my mind's eye. After all, resurrection is impossible, isn't it? You have to be unhinged to think otherwise. Unless, of course, you have some evidence that proves I encountered the professor that night.
I don't know. Is there any material evidence that could show he really did see the professor?
If we have anything at all, Mr. Naruhodo, I know I need to present it against the irritating backtracking statement of his. The point is, that night was a pivotal moment in my life.
Taking back now. Okay, so that's what we're pressing on. Got it. We have the camera for proof. Please tell me we have the thing on. Because my understanding is that we have to do the thing. Open sesame! And then we have to do the blood thing. And that's proof as to why it's there. Other than that, I don't see any other proof. No photo was taken behind because of some weird mechanic reason. This is where the photograph plate goes, I think, isn't it? Yes, that's right. Isn't it incredible to think that it is the actual camera Strode used that night? I certainly never imagined a piece of evidence would be a display of Madame Tussles. She's very keen on everything being untrue as live as possible, though, isn't she? Why do we have to go through that again? Why do we need to speed through? Oh well.
Objection!
That did not work! Oh my god. Oh my god. Thinking back now, I realized I never actually saw the professor at all, though. If you didn't actually saw him, blah 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 blah.
Objection!
I be mad. I be absolutely mad. I just guessed on that one, to be honest. Your last clip, you did see the professor on that night 10 years ago.
Oh dear, we seem to be at odds, but I was there, and you were not. I know what I didn't see.
The illustration with the article was drawn based upon what you told the journalist that you witnessed. I figure emerging from that tomb, wearing an iron mask. Yes, when the killer was tried 10 years ago. It was decided to close court ruling that the man would never wear the mask to hide his identity. It wasn't to be removed even during the execution and subsequent burial. Not even the prison wardens were to see the man's face, and obviously the provision of this mask was not public knowledge. So Mr. Driver, as you've just heard, a lowly student of the University of London certainly wouldn't have known about the condemned man's mask. So unless you actually seen the professor that night, it's inconceivable that the artist would have included the mask in the illustration. I just guessed on that one, Chief. I was not even thinking that. Order! Well, Mr. Drebber? It's a vile scene, isn't it? If you look closely. As I've already been on pains and point out, I was utterly petrified, which is why I had it in my head that I seen such a blood-curdling sight. But afterwards, I came to my senses and realized that I've been mistaken. You still say you didn't see it? If you're stubbornly sticking to that story, witness, then amend your testimony to explain exactly how you think your eyes deceive you. Of course. Only too happy to oblige. I can't believe he's still not going to concede the point. I just guessed that point, Chief. I wasn't even thinking about the mask.
Hold it!
A fellow grave robber? What are you talking about? Well, I wasn't the only one busy in the cemetery that night, you know. Other body snatchers were at work. Of course, when I saw one emerging from the hole, he dug my heart very nearly stopped. So that's the terrifying sight I actually saw, you see. You're claiming it was just another student on equally insalubrious business as yourself? Many of the medical students would wear metal masks to protect them from bacteria during dissections. Clearly, the fellow was just using a mask to protect his anonymity. Wouldn't you say? But there's no more to the story, isn't there? The article goes on to say, in the next second, a gunshot rang out suddenly from behind. The bullet pierced the resurrected man's chest, whose breath then stilled once more. We might assume the sexton discovered the miscreants and worked, perhaps, and fired upon them. If a gravedigger had shot someone in the cemetery, I think it might have been rather big news, my lord. Ah, yes, well, I can only assume it was an embellishment bolted on later by the reporter. Poor Mr. Sholmes.
Excuse me.
Madam Tusples. Don't take it out on Mr. Sholmes. I knew it!
Oh, la, pardon. I was lost in my thoughts.
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Drebber's last remark was significant to you in some way?
I thought it was a little strange, that is all. How Monsieur Drebber could claim this now.
If you don't mind me saying, madam, what are you talking about?
Well, when I met you 10 years ago in your university dormitory, you recounted to me at your adventures in the cemetery, no?
She's on our side.
Including the gunshot?
Stop. You might want to watch your tongue, you know.
Objection!
Have a care, Drebber. That's no way to speak to a lady. Please, Madam Tusples, carry on.
Of course. According to what Monsieur Drebber told me at the time, he did hear a gunshot from behind him and the bullet hit the condemned man.
I said nothing of the sort.
No, you were very explicit about the details. About the mask that the figure was wearing. And the blood that spattered over you when he was shot.
Finally, the proof! Enough! Shut up, woman! You're making all this up. That will do. Mr. Drebber. Yes? You refute the account as given by Madame Tusples? I have no recollection of ever saying those things. Come on! Do you really expect us to believe you? Control yourself, counsel. I will not permit baseless accusations in my courtroom. Right. Under the circumstances, I think it's best that you supplement your testimony with a statement to clarify your position on this, witness. Very well. There was no gunshot from behind me at all, no spotting of blood. That's a false lie! I have the proof!
Objection!
Mr. Drebber, do you remember this camera?
But that is the camera from the fatal night.
Yes, we borrowed it from the House of Horrors. It's the camera you took with you to the cemetery that night, Mr. Drebber. And is that supposed to be as significant? This kind of camera is rarely seen in our homeland, so my colleague and I were keen to examine it closely. We noticed that the lens extends forward in the end of some bellows. like this. What's that? There's just on the bellows. It looks like a dark red stain. That's right. It's a rather conspicuous mark here on the bellows, in fact. Good lord, are you suggesting? Yes, my lord. It would appear to be a spatter of blood. Something that could be confirmed with a simple chemical test. Isn't that right, Dr. Scythe? It would be difficult to determine if it was human blood and not the blood of some animal. But yes, to test whether or not it's blood or not at all is simple enough. I propose that Madame Tuswell's testimony was correct, and that on the night in question 10 years ago, you were spattered with blood from the gunshot wound. Well, And that, furthermore, you really did witness the condemned professor emerging from his tomb. And yet we have not yet reached the point as to why he killed the man. There's simply no way you could have forgotten such a traumatic experience. In other words, the only explanation is that you're trying to hide the fact that you saw the professor that night. Objection! But why? Why would he want to do that? Well, not for his own gain, it would seem. For whose then? Who would benefit? Mr. Drebber is obviously lying in order to protect somebody. My goodness, he's shielding someone? Yes, my lord, and clearly it's someone who doesn't want the truth about the professor coming back to life to be exposed. Dr. Scythe? Well, counsel, who is it then? Who is this witness trying to protect by lying about what he saw last night? Her? Take that! The obvious answer is Dr. Scythe. Scythe. What? Whatever do you mean? Oh, she's giving us the look. Imagine if the convict who'd been sentenced to death was not in fact killed. Imagine if that was to come to light. What are you insinuating? And imagine if the convict in question was the country's most hated mass murderer. If it was the professor. That would be unprecedented scandal. Objection! This is beyond a joke. Need I point out that the dead cannot come back to life? What you're suggesting would mean that the execution never actually happened. Yes, that's exactly what it could mean. Objection! Once a man is sent to the gallows, he hangs. No one could escape, not in Great Britain. But the fact is, there was a witness to the fact that the man did escape his hanging. If that were really true, counsel, the implications of misconduct would not stop at the supervising coroner. It would taint the honor of the entire judiciary from the ground up. And it's exactly because of those monumental repercussions that Dr. Scythe would consent to any demand made of her by someone who threatened to expose the secret, even if that meant being complicit in a crime. You mean? I mean that Dr. Scythe wasn't collaborating in Mr. Drebber's wicked scheme. She was coercing into collaborating in order to protect her decade-old secret. She switched the dead body of Mr. Osmond with a waxwork model and fabricated the autopsy report. Lord Van Zykes? Pray forgive my freshly filled hollow chalice, and a whole raft of other discordancies now. Goodness me! It's just that sort of tall tale Londoners would enjoy, I grant you. An executed killer rising from the dead, a Scotland Yard cover-up, a conspiracy at the highest levels. So let me ask you one thing. What's that? If the condemned man really did emerge from his tomb that night only to be shot in the chest, who pulled the trigger and disposed of him forever? Well, I have no idea at the moment. We have no little information to work that out at present, I think. I couldn't agree more. Did you not just break it? The Old Bailey is no place for wild fantasies. And have you considered this, my learned Nipponese friend? Considered what? Do you realize that just what a dangerous endeavor it would be to coerce this woman into such criminal activity? It's tantamount to declaring war on the entire British police force and judiciary. Quite hard to imagine any sum of money being offered for research would warrant it. To rely on some staged deception when so much at stake would be madness. Well, I suppose. And this was no petty crime either. The victim was murdered. A man who'd already invested money in the venture and could be instrumental in future profits too. Yes, I had no reason to kill Mr. Osmond at all. Or are you forgetting that his death results in me not receiving a single penny? The court is already aware of the contract between myself and the victim, no? There is the contract, that's very true. The motive for this case runs deep, though. I can feel it. Using threats to force the head of the forensic team to cooperate is extreme, especially for a government grant he had no guarantee of receiving in the first place. If the research grant was the aim, taking Mr. Osmond's life would have been made no sense anyway, which means Mr. Drebber's motive wasn't money at all. He was just trying to kill Mr. Osmond. But why? What was his motive then? Your time is up, my learned friend. I say you have one last chance before the jury lose their patience with the charade. Let's see if you can back up your heady proposal, shall we? Yo! How do you expect why this engineer would throw all caution to the wind and threaten his own country? At this point, I'm not prepared to listen to more of this outlandish conjecture without proof. So, counsel, present your evidence. Alright. Who exactly was Mr. Osmond to Drebber? There's a connection there that no one's seen yet. And I'm going to have to present 2 pieces of evidence to show what it is. I only know one, Chief. I only know one connection. Oh, never mind. I have an idea. The evidence that establishes a motive explains why the witness wanted the victim dead is right here. The newspaper article!
Take that!
It's this newspaper article, my lord. That was written 10 years ago. And every detail has been examined already. What can it possibly tell us? That drivel should never have been written. It's typical gutter press nonsense that means nothing. Yes, on its own, it isn't particularly significant. However, when considered alongside another piece of evidence, it will completely explain your motive for wanting Osmond dead. What other evidence? Good, counsel. You will present your supplementary evidence without delay. The evidence, which, when cross-referenced with the newspaper article, established a motive for the deed. And that's where this comes in.
Take that!
It's this contract, my lord. Mr. Drebber, this is the contract you signed with Mr. Osmond. Yes, that's right. The very document, in fact. That proves I had no reason to kill the man. No, I'm afraid not. What? There's something very significant that this newspaper article and the contract have in common. Really? Really? And it's the common link that shows very clearly why you were determined to kill Mr. Adi Osmond. It seems the defense has uncovered something the rest of us have missed. So, my learned friend, point out what these 2 pieces of evidence have in common. Where exactly is the link between the newspaper article and the contract? It is right here, sir. Get up!
Take that!
What these 2 pieces of evidence have in common is a signature. A signature? The signature on the illustration that accompanies the 10-year-old article and the signature on the contract. It belongs to the same person. What? Ugh. As the court has heard, this illustration was drawn 10 years ago by the newspaper reporter who found Mr. Drebber and interviewed him about his ordeal. If you look closely, the reporter's signature can be seen in the bottom right corner of the drawing. And if you look at the contract here, which was signed between the witness and the victim last year, you can clearly see Osmond's signature at the bottom. Let me see now. Good lord, yes, they're identical. In short, the journalist who drew the illustration and wrote the article published about Mr. Drebber 10 years ago was the victim of this case, Mr. Adi Osmond.
Attention!
But explain to the court why. Why would that constitute a motive for the witness to murder Osmond? Well, if you think back, you'll remember that Mr. Drebber talked about that article in his testimony. Grave robbing, you say? Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. Let's move on, Chief. Then I gave up. Blah 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 blah. I thought we're still on that thing, but okay. I thought we flashed back into the present. And at that time, you were a student at the University of London who dreamt of becoming a scientist. However, this single newspaper article changed your entire life. So Mr. Osmond used to be a newspaper journalist, did he? He did, my lord. In fact, it's widely held belief that Osmond managed to position himself at the heart of his criminal network, thanks to the many dubious connections he made during his time as a reporter. He did? So you had to give up on your dream and leave university. You lost everything. Eventually you found yourself working in the field of science, but only in the shadows. And all because of that article, written by Mr. Osmond. Enough! We have yet to establish the link between those two. We have yet to establish the link. Stop this endless drivel about my life. Explain yourself, Mr. Drebber. Yes, it's true. I had to leave the university as a result of that article. But it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. What do you mean? Almost every student of science in the faculty was too poor to actually conduct any research. But they struggled with the hypothesis anyway. We all did, only to have them taken by them vultures. Sooner or later, you knew your ideas would be stolen and patented by some wretch or other after all. Good gracious. Making a name for yourself as a scientist in a climate like that was a miracle only a select few geniuses could ever hope to achieve. Personally, I wasn't one of those geniuses, so it was hardly a wrench. Being forced out of the university because of low gate was the best thing that could have happened to me.
Attention!
Mr. Drebber, do you genuinely believe that? Of course I do. Who's better placed to know whether or not I possess a talent for science than me? I'm sorry to say that your words don't ring true at all. How dare you? And I have evidence to prove it. How are you in position to say anything about me? I don't know you from Adam. Fine, if you think you have evidence, go ahead. Show it. What could you possibly have to disprove the idea that I was happy to leave the universe because I was lacked talent? What? What could you possibly have to disprove the idea that I was happy? I don't get his statement. The photo? I don't know. Something that proves that he was not happy? I don't know. That worked? Okay, I wasn't working. Shut up. Shut up. Okay. So what the hell are we after? Something that proves that I was what would prove until that? Oh, this.
Take that!
Do you remember this, Mr. Drebber? We found at your workshop. Is that a Royal Society trophy for excellence in science? What exactly is this trophy, Counsel? It's the greatest honor that can be bestowed on a young scientist, my lord. There is no higher accolade. It recognizes emerging talent and promises a bright future. Good gracious! Your prospects for future were excellent, weren't they, Mr. Drebber? Because even then, you were a genius in your field. But you lost everything. You had no more future. Your talents would go to waste. All as a result of this one newspaper article. I don't know when you realized that who Mr. Osmond was, but when drawn on you that he was the same journalist who 10 years ago ruined your life, it was abundantly clear that you had no intention of forgiving that man. The truth is, finally, he's going to fold. Hold it! Oh. Who's gonna commit suicide? Fine. Clearly this has run its course now. What?
I admit it. All of it.
What? What are you doing?
It's exactly as the Japanese man said. I was coerced into going along with this man's plot to murder the victim, on the condition that he kept my dirty secret from 10 years ago.
No. Good lord. Can we at least see who the heck was behind the mask? Dr. Scythe, do you realize what you're saying, woman?
It's all true. That day, when I arrived at the Crystal Tower and saw the birdcage, my heart nearly stopped beating. That memory from a decade ago that I'd done my best to bury deep inside myself. It was the professor again, staring me in the face. And then, before I had a chance to react, I noticed something else. There was a note tucked inside the model's jacket. Dr. Scythe, you will go along with my plan, from someone who knows the truth about what really happened that night 10 years ago. All the instructions were there in the note. Every detail was meticulously written out. I had no choice but to do what it said. I made the necessary alterations to that scene and fabricated the autopsy report as instructed. There was really no other choice. It had to be done to protect the judiciary. I can only apologize now.
Why on earth would you buckle now?
Well, there's no point trying to hide it anymore, is there? I would have done anything to stop it coming out, even collaborate in a murder. But the great lie about the execution 10 years ago has been exposed. Whatever happens, I'm finished.
So then, Mr. Drebber, what do you say to that? Your accomplice has admitted everything. Surely it goes without saying. You admit your part in it too? I admit nothing at all. What? Have you forgotten that the kinesis machine was ripped to shreds by an explosion? Short of me admitting to a crime, there's really no possible way for you to prove I did anything wrong. No! Order!
Whatever this man says, I admit everything. He threatened to expose my secret, so I went along with his plan. And Lord Von Sykes,
yes.
I hope you accept my apologies. What happens next is in your hands, of course.
I have heard more than enough now. I hereby present the final findings of this court. This trial is not the proper forum in which to pursue the alleged wrongdoings of Mr. Drebber. The defendant is Professor Albert Harebrain. Very true. It had slipped my mind. Isn't he one of your closest friends? As the court has heard, Dr. Scythe has admitted to the allegations brought by the defense. thereby absolving the defendant of any possible guilt. You mean... At the present time, it is the conclusion of this court that the defendant was not involved in any wrongdoing. Does the prosecution have any objection? None, my lord.
Uncle, congratulations, Mr. Naruhodo. You've proven Miss Professor Harebrain's innocence.
Without further ado then, the adjudication, whatever. Unless the prosecution or defense have any other matters to discuss. It's kind of... I don't know. This doesn't feel quite right. Why did Dr. Side suddenly admit to it like that? Is everything alright, Mr. Naruhodo? Like you said before, the way the trial is set to end now, the judge will certainly deliver a verdict of non-guilty. But is that really what we want? What the defense should be pushing for now is... further testimony?
Objection!
The defense objects to the trial ending at this time, my lord. I beg your pardon? We demand one final testimony. What? Something that Shams was saying. You do realize I'm about to adjudicate in favor of your client, I presume? What are you playing at now, my Nipponese friend? Why would you want to obstruct the conclusion of the trial at this point? No defense lawyer in his right mind would do that.
Mr. Naruhodo, what exactly are you thinking?
The truth. The whole truth. In a way to bring it all out in the open.
Right.
Yes, in hindsight. Ah, yes, one word of warning before I go. If, in the course of this trial this afternoon, you perceive even a shadow of doubt about the truth, don't let it out of your sight. Pursue it like a dog with a bone. To the bitter end, you understand. Do not falter, whatever may come to pass. I'm sure Mr. Sholmes knew. He must have deduced that this would happen. Yes, I'm here in the court to advocate my client and to secure acquittal. Obviously. But that's not all. I believe I have a duty to court to pursue the whole truth of the case until every last detail is laid bare. And that is why the defense calls for further testimony from Dr. Sight. Testimony from me? About what? About the nature of your collaboration with Mr. Enoch Drebber. In case it escaped your attention, I've already admitted to everything I did. The whole truth has already revealed. So stop wasting everyone's time. As his lordship made very plain, your client will get the acquittal you wanted for him. There's simply no point protecting this business further without another tedious cross-examination.
Objection!
Here we go. Pray forgive my careless handling of that hollow ballow. I slipped. That's what you call it? What is your objection, Lord Von Zykes? The prosecution also calls for supplementary testimony from the witness. Don't be stupid. I know Tubbs is just there chilling. If there's more to this case than has yet to come to light, then I will join my learned friend in pursuing the facts until the bitter end. You're what? Lord Von Zykes. This is most irregular to say the least. However, as the prosecution also calls for it, I will uphold the request. Dr. Scythe, you will testify for the court. Explain the full extent of your involvement in the murder. Very well. And with that, we'll end the episode right here. Like, comment, subscribe, Chronicles XTV, and I'm signing out.